In 2024, my 267 square foot garden produced 450 pounds of food. In 2025, that same space jumped up to 520 pounds. But here's the weird part. Some of my favorite crops failed while the others carried my garden. Today, I'm breaking down that 70-pound jump so that we can hit my 2026 goal of 650 pounds together. The first thing that surprised me was how many crops actually went backwards. I harvested only about a quarter of the amount of cabbage that I harvested in 2024. There's two reasons for this. The first one is I didn't plant as many cabbages in 2025 compared to 2024. The reason for this is that I realized that my family prefers to eat cabbage fresh. We don't like it fermented and we don't like it frozen. So having a bunch of cabbage all ready at once didn't serve my family's need. The second reason is my fall planting of cabbage failed. Because I wanted cabbage consistently fresh, I did a spring planting, which did okay, and then a fall planting that completely failed. And the reason it failed was because I did not proactively spray with BT, and the cabbage moths had their way with those cabbages. They went into the ground with damage, and they never really recovered. Then there was green beans. I harvested less than half the amount of green beans in 2025 than I did in 2024. And to be honest, that was pretty devastating. We are already down to our last 2 frozen bags of green beans, and we are still months away from any fresh green beans coming out of the garden. Interestingly enough, I planted the same variety of green bean in the same quantity, in the same location, on the same trellises, yet I ended up with half the harvest. And that's because the birds had their way with my green beans. They were hungry and thirsty this year, and they did a fair number on them. That taught me a valuable lesson. Just because something works beautifully one season doesn't guarantee that it's going to work every season. And then cherry tomatoes are another crop that I only harvested a little over half of the amount that I did in 2024. In 2025, I only planted 1 plant less because 5 plants was too much for my family of 4, so I pared it down to 4 plants. I think the change in the harvest came down to variety. In 2024, I planted more of a variety called Barry's Crazy Cherry, and it is incredibly high yielding. However, what I have found is that we just don't gravitate to those yellow cherry tomatoes. We much prefer the red cherry tomatoes. So I only planted 1 Barry's Crazy Cherry in 2025, and the rest were red cherry tomatoes. I also think later in the season, I just stopped harvesting the cherry tomatoes. I didn't have time to do anything with them to get them frozen or processed, and there were far too many for us to eat fresh, so I think I just left them there unharvested. And unharvested produce doesn't count. Now let's talk about the crops that pushed my harvest higher. Carrots really jumped up in yield. I harvested 5 times the amount of carrots in 2025 than I did in 2024. Yes, I planted more carrots, but I also gave them the soil they needed. Carrots need loose soil, so I planted them primarily in my raised beds instead of trying to struggle them in ground. I also think I nailed down the timing for a fall harvest. In prior years, I've tried to get a fall harvest of carrots by starting in August, and there's just not enough time. They need to be started in July in order to get a decent crop where I am by the time our frost comes in October. Potatoes. I doubled the harvest of potatoes in 2025 compared to 2024. And this came down to the fact that I doubled the amount of potatoes I planted. In 2024, I did 1 bed. In 2025, I did 2 of my raised beds. I also did a much better job of protecting them from rodents. In 2024, I lost my largest potatoes to rodent damage. And to me, if you can't eat it, it doesn't get weighed, it doesn't count. So those potatoes weren't included in my count. They went into the compost pile. 2025, I was proactive with some monitoring and some protection and didn't have the rodent damage I suffered in 2024. Paste tomatoes are always a strong performer in my garden. I harvested 30 more pounds of tomatoes in 2025 than I did in 2024. This mostly comes down to the fact that I planted more tomatoes in 2025. However, I think it was too many tomatoes for my family. We also had new crops hit the harvest table in 2025. The one I'm most excited about was apples. My apple trees finally have started to produce a little fruit after 4 years of waiting. I got the most beautiful bowl of 8 pounds of apples, and they were absolutely delicious. Only one of my 2 apple trees produced any fruit last year, so I'm really looking forward to see if both trees will kick it into gear and produce fruit this year. Beets. It's not the first time I've grown them in my garden, but it's the first time I've ever gotten a harvest. In previous years, I've grown beautiful beet leaves, but they've never formed any good roots. I think this came down to finding the right variety for my garden. And I did that in 2025. Not every crop in your garden needs to increase year over year for the overall output of your garden to increase. And sometimes you actually want to decrease some crops so that you have room for more things that you enjoy eating. The goal for 2026 is to raise my harvest total from 520 pounds to 650 pounds. So which crops do I think will raise my harvest totals in 2026? Well, the first one is broccoli. With 60% of my spring garden going to broccoli, I expect a harvest over 30 pounds. I'm also hoping for an increase in my carrot yield again this year. I'm planting a couple different successions this year compared to the one planting I did last year. This is to keep carrots in my kitchen steadier throughout the year instead of just one large fall harvest. Green beans, I'm hoping to get back to that 60-pound harvest that we had in 2024. And I'm doing this by mixing up my green bean variety and the type of green beans I'm growing to hopefully be able to keep more of it for ourselves. I'm hoping for my largest harvest of sweet peppers yet, but that involves me nailing down why I can't seem to grow sweet peppers without them rotting on the plants as they ripen. Probably the heaviest lifter in the garden this year is going to be winter squash. I'm really hoping to have good success with winter squash this year, both acorn squash and butternut squash. I'm hoping to grow about 50 pounds of winter squash in 2026. But like the growth from 2024 to 2025, I'm not expecting all my crops to increase. In 2025, I had a cucumber plant that was very happy. That one plant produced 26 pounds of cucumbers. I had planted the same variety in the same spot in 2024, but only gotten about 12 pounds of cucumbers. I'm guessing that last year was a little bit of a fluke, so I'm expecting more a return to that 12-pound harvest mark. The 180 pounds of paste tomatoes I grew in 2025 was just too many for my family. So this year we're paring it back to 14 plants and hoping to get 140 pounds of tomatoes. This will open up some space on my trellis for a crop that my family thinks is much more fun, melons. Be sure to subscribe to see if we hit our 650-pound goal by the end of the season. In my next video, I'll be sharing how I plan to grow lettuce all year round in my small backyard.